My name is Rachel Ousley, and I'm 34 years old. 6 days after my son and I left for a trip we take every June, we walked back into our own house and found his bedroom stripped to the carpet, with the dents of his bunk bed still pressed into it like footprints. My sister stood in the doorway of that empty room and laughed. She said she took the room, sold everything, and got a good price. My mother chuckled behind her and said my sister was pregnant, so it was only fair. My son held onto my shirt and cried into it, and I said nothing at all. I just walked away. But by the time the leaves turned that fall, my sister's smile was gone, my mother was packing boxes of her own, and my whole family had learned exactly what my silence had been holding up all those years. None of them saw the first domino fall. I did. I pushed it. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. This channel is where quiet women finally tell the stories their families hoped they would keep to themselves. Stories of patience, betrayal, and the day the patience ran out. If this story finds something in you, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. To tell it right, I have to start with Daniel. My husband was a flight paramedic out of Mesa, Arizona, the kind of man who could splint a fracture in a helicopter at 3 in the morning and still text me a bad joke before landing. 3 years ago, his crew took a transfer flight on a windy night, and the helicopter went down in the desert east of the valley. He was 33. The life insurance paid off our little 3-bedroom house, which is a sentence I can say now without my voice cracking, most days. I stayed on nights in the pediatric intensive care unit because sick kids don't keep business hours and neither does grief. Our son Tommy was 4 when his father died. He's 7 now. Quiet like Daniel, patient like Daniel, and he built his whole world inside his bedroom. That room was our small museum. Daniel's flight jacket hung in the closet. His grandfather's Hamilton watch sat in a locked cabinet, the initials worn soft on the caseback. His toolbox lived under the window. And on the desk sat a half-built wooden sailboat, ribs and keel and one coat of nothing, because Daniel and Tommy had started it together the winter before the crash. They had a deal, those two. They shook on it like businessmen. The boat would touch water the year Tommy turned 8. After the funeral, Tommy asked me if the deal still counted. I told him yes. We worked on it an hour here, an hour there, sanding what Daniel had cut. It was the slowest boat ever built in Arizona, and it was the only clock that mattered in our house, which is exactly why what happened to it still wakes me up some nights. Now, the rest of the household. 2 years ago, my mother, Martha, had her knee replaced, lost her rental when the rent jumped, and ran out of options. I converted our den into a bedroom and moved her in. She's 61. She watched Tommy 3 nights a week while I worked, and I covered her phone bill, her prescriptions, her car insurance, and the gap between her Social Security and reality. That arrangement had a name in our family. The name was Rachel. I've been the strong one since I was about 12, when my father's paychecks got unreliable and somebody had to make sure Catherine had lunch money. In my family, being capable is a chronic condition. There's no cure. There are only more chores. My father, Gene, passed 6 years ago, and after that my mother's math got even simpler. Whatever the family needed, the family took from whoever had it, and the one who had it was me. I want to be fair to her, because fair matters to me in a way it never mattered to them. She wasn't cruel. She never raised her hand. She just believed, all the way down, that a family is a bucket line, and the strong daughter stands at the well. For more than 20 years, I passed every bucket they handed me. I told myself that was love, and that if I kept passing, nobody's house would ever burn down. Then there was my sister, Catherine, 6 years younger, 28, pretty, broke, and permanently owed something by somebody. For me, the rules were granite. For Catherine, the rules were elastic. I knew that. I'd known it my whole life. I just never guessed how far the elastic could stretch in the 6 days my back was turned. 2 months before our trip, Catherine's boyfriend Kyle found out about the pregnancy and left the state. And the apartment in Tempe went with him, since the lease and most of the rent had been his. Catherine landed on my porch with a duffel bag and an opening offer. Just a few weeks, Rachel. Just until the baby comes. I said no. I want that on the record because people love to ask why I didn't see this coming. I saw it coming. In this house, a few weeks is a unit of forever. I had 3 bedrooms and 3 people, and I had a 7-year-old whose entire sense of safety was nailed to one room. So I said no, and I paid the first month on a studio for her near Fiesta Mall instead, and my mother didn't speak to me at dinner for a week. "Your sister is family," she finally said, like she was correcting my grammar. I did more than say no. I put a lock on the cabinet where the watch and the jacket lived, a little brass thing, and I priced out changing the front door locks. And then a PICU schedule and a stomach flu ate the 2 weeks I had, and my mother lived there. And you cannot lock your own mother out of the house she sleeps in. So the spare cabinet key stayed where our spare keys had always stayed, in the junk drawer by the stove. And I told myself the brass lock was mostly a message anyway. One more thing, and at the time, it meant nothing. Catherine started liking half the listings on our neighborhood marketplace page: strollers, cribs, dressers, and I thought, good, she's nesting on a budget. I understood the likes later. She wasn't browsing, she was pricing. Every June, Tommy and I drive the 6 hours to San Diego because there's a pier there where Daniel proposed to me, and we bring donuts to the water and tell him about our year. It's the one week I don't carry anybody. This year we were gone 6 days. We came home on a Sunday afternoon, sunburned and happy, and Tommy ran ahead of me down the hall to his room the way he always does, and then he stopped in the doorway and didn't make a sound, which was worse than any scream I've heard on any shift. The room was empty. Bunk bed, gone. Desk, gone. The toy shelf, the rug, the lamp shaped like a helicopter, gone. The cabinet with the brass lock was gone from the closet, and so was everything it had held, and in the corner where the boat had been drying stood a brand new white crib with the tag still on. My sister came out of my son's bathroom holding a paint sample card, and she smiled at me. "Where are my son's things?" I asked. Catherine laughed, actually laughed, one hand resting on her belly. "I took the room. I sold everything. Got a good price." From the kitchen doorway my mother chuckled, drying her hands on a dish towel like this was a Tuesday. "Your sister is pregnant," she said. "It's only fair, right?" "Fair is fair." Tommy grabbed a fistful of my shirt and pressed his face into my ribs, and I felt him shaking before I heard him crying. I looked at my sister's smile and my mother's dish towel, and I heard 3 generations of buckets being passed down a line, and I said one thing, and I didn't say it to them. "Get your backpack, baby." Then I took my son's hand and walked out of my own house. My mother watched me go with no worry at all on her face. She thought my silence meant yes. She had a lifetime of evidence. She was wrong by one night. We went next door. Lauren Reyes has been my neighbor for 8 years and my friend for 7.5 of them, a school counselor with a guest room, and the good sense not to fill silence with talk. She made Tommy grilled cheese and put on a nature show, and he watched whales with wet eyes and asked me questions in a small flat voice, going down the list of his life. Is my bike gone? Is my helicopter lamp gone? Are my dad's tools gone? I answered honestly because he'd just watched 2 adults lie with their whole faces, and he needed one who wouldn't. Then he got to the end of his list. He looked up at me and said, "We weren't done building it." That was the whole sentence. He said it dry-eyed, flat, like a fact he was checking, and then he turned back to the whales, and I went into Lauren's kitchen and held onto the counter for a while. After he fell asleep, I sat up and did what I do at work when a shift goes wrong. I ran the list again, slowly, item by item, the way you count meds at the end of a night. And partway through the list I stopped, because I hit a detail with edges on it. The cabinet had a lock, a small brass lock, and I had the only key on my ring, nearly 400 miles away in San Diego, which meant somebody had gone through the junk drawer by the stove, found the spare, and opened that cabinet on purpose. This wasn't a pregnant woman clearing space in a hurry. Somebody had stood in front of my husband's things, used a key, and made a decision. I slept 3 hours. Then I went home to ask my questions. Monday morning, I walked back across the yard and into my kitchen, and I tried it the family way, once, because I needed to know exactly who I was dealing with before I decided what to do about it. I kept my voice level, the one I use with frightened parents. I said I wanted two things: a list of every buyer and whatever money was left, so I could start buying my son's life back. Catherine looked at me like I'd asked her to return a borrowed sweater. It was kid furniture, Rachel. Half of it was junk. Honestly, you should thank me for decluttering. I asked about the jacket, the watch, the toolbox, the boat. She shrugged. Old man stuff, she said. Dead people don't need storage. My mother came in on the second half of that sentence and started smoothing it over the way other people sweep glass, briskly, without looking down. She had a solution, she announced. Tommy could sleep on the sofa until the baby settled. Children adapt. And someday the cousins would laugh about this. I looked at the two of them arranging my son's childhood like furniture, and I asked my one real question. How much, Kathy? She blinked. What? How much did you get for all of it? She did some math in the air, proud of it. Like 900? Maybe a little more. And it's spent, before you ask. Car seat, stroller, the crib. Babies aren't free. I nodded, and I wrote the number on the whiteboard of my mind the way I log vitals. Time-stamped. Exact. $900. Then I told my sister to take her crib and be out of my house by dinner. And she went. To the studio across town she'd been calling homelessness, with my mother trailing her to the car saying this wasn't over. They watched me nod and thought they'd won, because nodding quietly is what I've always done. They had no idea what I do with numbers. That night, with Tommy asleep in Lauren's guest room again, I opened my laptop and went to my sister's marketplace profile. And there it all was, my son's bedroom, laid out under her smiling profile photo like a garage sale nobody asked me about. 14 listings. Bunk bed, $120. Kid's desk, $45. Boy's bike, $60. A tablet I'd bought him for school, $90. Vintage pilot jacket, $60, and in the photo you could still see the squadron patch Daniel's crew gave him. Old man's watch, $75, runs fine. $75, for a Hamilton with his great-grandfather's initials on the case back. I didn't throw the laptop. I did what I do at 2 in the morning when a monitor starts alarming. I got methodical. Screenshot, save, next. Screenshot, save, next. Every listing, every timestamp, every chirpy little description she'd typed while I was standing on a pier telling my dead husband our year had been gentle. Then I pulled the folder I never wanted to need, the insurance inventory I'd made after Daniel died, when the adjuster had me photograph and value everything of his. Photos, serial numbers, the watch appraisal. I matched 14 listings against my own records like reconciling a med count, and I built a folder on my desktop and named it Tommy's Room, all caps. It was almost peaceful, in an awful way. It felt like the first true thing anyone had done in that house in a week. And then, at the bottom of her profile, I found the 15th listing, grayed out and marked sold, and my hands went still on the keys. The photo was taken at an angle, on our porch. Unfinished wood boat. Craft project. $15. I didn't click it. Not that night. I couldn't. Tuesday, I called the Mesa Police non-emergency line on my lunch break, standing in the hospital parking garage where nobody could hear me say the words out loud. My sister sold my son's belongings while we were out of town. The officer was polite and tired. He asked who lived in the home. I said I owned it. My mother lived with us. My sister did not. He asked if my sister had ever stayed there, had a key, got mail there. He said the words, household situation, and then he said the words that I'd already read about on 3 legal websites at 4 in the morning, so I knew they were coming. Sounds like it might be a civil dispute, ma'am. Family property situations usually are. Here's the thing about being a nurse. You don't argue with triage, you learn what gets a patient seen. So I didn't cry into the phone, and I didn't hang up angry. I asked him a question instead. What would make this a criminal matter and not a civil one? He paused and his voice changed a little, like a man sitting up straighter. Proof of ownership, he said. Proof of value. Proof she had no permission, and that she wasn't a resident with a claim to the property. Documentation, basically. Most people don't have it. I looked through the windshield at nothing and thought about the folder on my desktop with my son's room inside it, indexed, time-stamped, and appraised. Most people don't have it. I thanked him and said, "You'll be hearing from me," and he laughed like people say that all the time. They probably do, but I spend every night of my working life proving things on paper to people whose job is doubting me. Documentation is my native language. The family heard I'd been asking questions before the police heard anything at all, which tells you something about the speed of guilt. Wednesday evening, my Aunt Deb called, my mother's younger sister, the keeper of the family group chat and the family version of events. She has a voice like a warm oven and she uses it like a crowbar. "Rachel, honey, whatever this is, family does not call the police on family." I said my son's dead father's things had been sold to strangers. She sighed the way you sigh at a child who won't share. "Sweetheart, your sister is carrying a baby. You have a whole house. She has nothing. Fair is fair." There it was, the family motto, out of a second mouth now, wearing my aunt's voice this time, and I finally heard it for what it was. Not a judgment somebody had reached, but a rule somebody had installed. Then Deb told me the story as she'd received it, and I got to hear the official version for the first time. The way she'd heard it, I'd been meaning to clear out that old kid's furniture anyway, and Catherine had done me a favor managing the sale, and now I was twisting a kindness into a crime because I'd never liked our sister. I asked who told her that. She said, "Well, your mother, honey. Who else?" I stood in my kitchen holding the phone and understood that while I'd been screenshotting listings, my mother had been out ahead of me, telling the family a story where the woman with the empty-roomed child was the villain. They had the narrative. I had a folder. Only one of those holds up in a room where the truth matters, and I was done spending time in rooms where it didn't. The PICU was quiet Thursday night. 2 stable kids and a lot of humming machines, and between rounds I built the binder. I do this for a living, chart so precisely that a stranger can reconstruct a night they never saw. So I charted my sister. Column 1, the 14 listings, screenshots with timestamps, all posted within 2 days of our leaving for San Diego. Column 2, my insurance inventory, photo for photo, serial number for serial number. The watch appraisal from a jeweler on Main Street, $600, dated 2 years ago. Column 3, the money. Catherine's payment app history was public, because of course it was. She'd never set a thing to private in her life. Buyers' names, dates, jokey little notes. All 6 days I was gone, lined up like a confession she'd written herself. Matched against her listing prices and the cash sales she'd bragged about, my running total of what she'd collected came to about $940. Then I did the number that actually mattered. Fair market value, off the inventory and the appraisal, and it came to just about $2,600. I sat back and laughed once, out loud, alone in the charting room, because my sister had committed a felony and still managed to sell at a loss. Around 3 in the morning, I messaged the 2 buyers whose names I could match. Polite, no drama, just checking whether they'd known the seller. One didn't answer. The other one answered fast, and her message put a chill down the back of my scrubs. Wait, that stuff was stolen? She'd bought the bike for her grandson. And she had something to tell me about the day she picked it up. Something she'd seen in that driveway that made the whole thing worse. What the bike buyer had seen was an older man standing in my driveway with Daniel's toolbox in his arms, asking my sister whose tools these had been, and my sister answering, "Nobody's." That word did something to me that all 14 listings hadn't quite done. Nobody's. The buyer gave me the man's name from the pickup thread, Walt Peterson, and I called him that Friday. Retired machinist, East Mesa, paid $40 for the toolbox. I got half my story out before he stopped me. He said, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He drove to my house in a truck older than me, carried the toolbox up my walk like it was a casket at a military funeral, and set it on my kitchen table. I tried to hand him his $40, and he looked at the bills like I'd offered him a parking ticket. "A man's tools belong to his boy," he said. That's not $40, ma'am. That's a will. Then he opened the lid, because he wanted me to see he hadn't touched anything, and there, folded into quarters under the socket tray, was a piece of graph paper I'd never seen before. Daniel's handwriting, pencil lines, measurements, a little drawing of a finished sailboat with its sail up, and along the bottom, in block letters, Tommy's boat, age 8. The plans. He'd drawn out the whole build, start to finish, and filed it where any mechanic would, with the tools. If you've ever had to buy back your own family's memories from strangers while the people who sold them called it fairness, tell me in the comments, because that week I learned strangers can be kinder than blood. And if you want to hear how far I had to go, stay with me and subscribe. I wish I could tell you the boy was fine, that 7-year-old's bounce, the way people love to say at funerals. Here is what fine looked like at our house, where Tommy was camped on an air mattress in my room until I could rebuild his. He wet the bed twice, the first time in over 2 years, and both times he tried to hide the sheets, because he'd decided the way you handle loss is you keep it off the grown-ups. Wednesday, his teacher sent home a note with a drawing from art time. The assignment had been my favorite place. Tommy had drawn a rectangle, empty, with a small door and nothing in it, and titled it, My Room, and his teacher wanted me to know he'd worked very hard on it and had asked how to spell empty. I have stood at the bedside of other people's children on the worst night of their parents' lives and kept my hands steady. At 2 in the morning at Lauren's, holding a wet fitted sheet outside the laundry closet, I was not steady. He appeared in the hallway behind me, small in borrowed pajamas, and he asked the question he'd apparently been building all week. Mom, did Dad's boat get thrown away because of me? Because I went on the trip too. I got down on the floor of that hallway and held my son while he actually confessed, to the crime of going to the beach with his mother. That was the night the last of my hesitation died. You can call the quiet thing I'd been doing gathering evidence. Fine. But some part of me had still been gathering it the way you hold a card you hope you'll never play. Tommy thought this was his fault. My family had done that math in his head. So I stopped hoping. Saturday morning, early, coffee going cold beside the laptop, I finally clicked the 15th listing. Unfinished woodboat, craft project, $15, sold. The photo had been taken on our front porch, taken carelessly, half the frame eaten by glare off the storm door, and the boat sat in the middle of it looking exactly like what it was, ribs and keel and hope. 11 months of Saturdays, a dead man's promise, half kept. We weren't done building it. I heard Tommy's voice say it again while I stared, and I made myself read every word of that listing twice. No buyer name, paid cash, porch pickup while I was gone. No profile to message, no thread to pull. The only clue in the whole photograph sat in the corner of the frame, reflected in the glass of the storm door, the tail end of a pickup truck parked at our curb, a faded copper color, an old tow mirror on the side. That was it. That was everything. A $15 boat and a copper-colored truck, somewhere in a metro area of 5 million people. I printed the photo anyway and put it in the front pocket of the binder. First thing you'd see when you opened it. Then I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I talked to Daniel out loud in an empty kitchen. I told him what his daughter-in-law of a sister had done, which he already knew, and what his mother-in-law had blessed, which he'd predicted once, gently, and I'd defended her. And then I made him and myself one promise, and I said it like a care plan, because that's how I keep promises. I will find every buyer, every single one, and then I'm filing the report. Monday morning, 8 o'clock, the Mesa Police Records lobby opened. I was going to be the first appointment of the week. The records lobby smelled like burnt coffee and floor wax, and I stood at the window in my scrubs because I'd come straight off shift. And maybe that helped. I'll never know. What I know is that the desk officer flipped through my binder for a minute, then picked up a phone, and 20 minutes later, I was across a table from Detective Marisol Alvarez, Property Crimes, a woman about 10 years older than me with reading glasses pushed up in her hair. She went through the binder without a word for a long time, the kind of quiet that means someone is actually reading. Then she tapped the page and asked the questions that decide everything. Did your sister live in the home? No, and I could show the studio lease I'd co-signed across town. Did she have permission? Any version of it? No. Whose name is on the house? Mine. Who owned the items? My son and my late husband's estate, and the inventory and appraisal in front of her said so with serial numbers. She sat back. People think family theft isn't theft, she said. It's theft. What you have here is called conversion. She controlled property that wasn't hers and sold it. She walked her pen down my valuation page, $2,600 fair market, and said quietly that the numbers mattered, that past $1,000 this was already a felony, and past $2,000 the felony class went up, and I watched her write a case number on the cover of my folder like a doctor signing an admission. You chart like this at work? She asked. Every night, I said. She almost smiled. Then she warned me, and she was kind about it, but she didn't soften it. I'll be inviting your sister in for an interview. Doors like this. Once you knock, you can't unknock. I told her I'd stop believing in that particular door anyway. Catherine got the detective's phone call on a Thursday, and my family found out what I'd done in under an hour, which, again, guilt travels faster than fiber. My mother didn't yell. Yelling would have meant treating me like a person she was fighting with. Instead, the house went cold and administrative, and she started speaking to me in memos. After everything I have done for you, delivered to the coffee maker. I raised both of you better than this, delivered to the dishwasher. And then Friday. The actual move. The one my whole life had taught her would work. She stood in the hallway in her robe and announced that she could not possibly watch Tommy anymore. Not for a daughter who treats family like criminals. And she went into her room and closed the door softly, because slammed doors are for amateurs. Understand what that meant in real money and real hours. 3 nights a week. My mother was my childcare, my whole schedule, my night differential, the shape of my job, all of it stood on her being home. So I went in Monday and asked for day shift, and my manager was human about it, and the transfer cost me the differential, about $400 a month, gone. Lauren took school pickups without being asked twice. I redid my budget at the kitchen table like a woman diffusing her own life, and I remember thinking, almost calmly, so this is the bill. This is what the last bucket costs. Turns out my safety net had terms and conditions, and the fine print was written in my mother's handwriting. That weekend, Catherine texted me for the first time since the empty room. No apology. She wanted to talk. Alone. I said fine, and braced for anything except what she actually said. We met at a coffee place on Southern because I wasn't having her in my house, and she showed up glowing with grievance, and for 45 minutes my sister explained the world to me. You have to understand how it looks from her side, she said. I have a whole house, a career, a kid who has everything. She has nobody. Kyle's gone, her body aches. And there I was, off on a beach vacation while she was homeless. Homeless, in the studio I was co-signing. And then she said the thing she'd clearly rehearsed, leaning in, sisterly, generous, like she was letting me off some hook. It's just stuff, Rachel. Dead people don't need stuff. Living babies do. I want you to notice something I noticed right there in that booth. She wasn't lying. That's what took me years to understand about my family. Catherine genuinely, all the way down to the studs, could not see a difference between need and right. All her life, the family had one law. Whoever needs it most gets it, and she'd been appointed neediest at birth. So the law had always ruled in her favor. She hadn't robbed my son, in her mind. She'd executed a policy. I put my coffee down and asked her one thing. The watch had his great-grandfather's initials on the back, I said. What were yours? She stared at me. And then, because pressure always finds her real shape, she dropped the sister voice and made it simple. If you press this, you will lose all of us, the whole family. Think about that. I did think about it, right there, while she watched me and rubbed her belly like a judge polishing a gavel. She thought it was a threat. She never understood it was an offer. Alvarez called me on a Tuesday afternoon, courteous and exact. The interview had gone about how interviews go when someone believes they're untouchable, my sister had explained, on the record, that she'd sold the items and spent the money, but that it wasn't stealing because it was family. The case file with that interview in it was going to the county attorney with a recommendation to charge theft by conversion. A week later, Catherine was served a summons, and my phone became a weather event. Cousins I hadn't heard from since Daniel's funeral suddenly had strong opinions about loyalty. Two texts stood out of the pile, one from a cousin in Tucson, quietly, for what it's worth. She did the same thing to Grandma's sewing machine. Nobody said anything then either. And one from my Aunt Deb, all bold sincerity, an invitation. Sunday dinner, her house, the whole family. We are going to talk this out like family. Bring Tommy. I told her not yet, and I could hear through the phone how much that answer wasn't in her script. That same evening, my mother made her last stand at the stove, stirring a pot she had no plans to share, and said, without turning around, "Drop it, Rachel. The county, the lawyers, all of it. She's your sister." She made one mistake. Fair is, and I left the kitchen. I want to be honest about that. I didn't stay for the end of the sentence. 34 years old, and it was the first time in my life I ever walked out of the room while my mother was still correcting me. My hands shook for 10 minutes afterward in my own bedroom, like I'd jumped off something high. Then the shaking stopped, and something else didn't start. And I realized the something else was dread, and it just wasn't there anymore. The dinner would come for me eventually, I knew that. First, there was a form waiting for my signature. The form was the victim statement, and Friday morning I went in to face it. Alvarez laid it on the table in a small interview room and told me plainly what it was and wasn't. This makes you the complaining witness, formally, on paper. The county decides the charges, not you. Later, if you want to ask for leniency, you can ask. They listen to victims. But you can't make this disappear once it's in the system. Take your time. I didn't need time to remember. I needed time to cross. I wrote out the facts I knew by heart: dates, items, values, the locked cabinet, the spare key, the porch photo, and then my pen stopped over the signature line, and I'm not going to pretend it didn't. I sat there and watched my whole quiet life go by, every fire I'd smothered so the family could stay warm, every time keeping the peace had been assigned to me like a shift nobody else would take. I thought, if I sign this, I am no longer the strong one. I'm the difficult one. There's no road back to the old seat at the old table. And then I thought about a rectangle drawn in crayon with a small door and nothing in it, and how hard my son had worked to spell empty. I signed it. Alvarez took the form without ceremony, which I was grateful for. On my way across the parking lot, I passed a car I knew, my Aunt Deb's sedan, parked in the visitor row, with Catherine in the passenger seat being coached through her sunglasses. The family machine, rolling. They'd lawyered up as a block. Good, I thought, and the word surprised me with how clean it felt. Let everyone bring their whole strength. I was done being the only one holding back. While the county did county things, I spent my weekends knocking on strangers' doors, buying back my son's life at retail. The woman who'd bought the Hamilton listened to the whole story on her doorstep with her hand over her mouth, then went inside and came back with the watch, and would only take the $75 she'd paid. It ran fine, just like the listing promised. There was a new scratch across the crystal. Thin, diagonal, the kind you feel with a thumbnail forever. I chose to keep it. Some records should stay legible. The flight jacket had gone to a collector who knew exactly what squadron patches mean and gave it back for his $60. Embarrassed to have it. And it came home smelling like somebody else's cigarettes. Which is its own kind of grief. Your husband's jacket coming back from a war it never should have been sent to. Tommy tried it on anyway. It swallowed him to the knees. It still smells wrong, he said, and wore it through dinner. The bunk bed and the desk, I lost. The buyer was polite and immovable. A deal's a deal, and he was legally right, and I wasn't going to become my sister about it, taking things because my need felt loud. The bike was 3 owners gone. The tablet, wiped and vanished. I kept a tally sheet on the refrigerator. Column of found, column of gone, and Tommy checked it every morning like a kid checking a fever chart. And one line stayed blank all through those weeks. The only line he actually asked about. No copper-colored truck. No boat. 62 days since the porch photo, and the trail was worse than cold. It had never existed. And then, on a Wednesday afternoon, I came home early from day shift and found my sister's car parked in my driveway. Catherine's car, my driveway, a Wednesday. I walked in and found my mother holding the front door open while my sister came down the hall carrying one of my bath towels full of something, and my mother said, "Calm as a crossing guard. She's just getting the last of her things from her room." Her room. One small phrase, and there it was. The whole future my mother was still building in her head, where the charges evaporate, the crib goes back in the corner, and my son grows up as a guest in his own house. I didn't shout. I stood in the doorway until Catherine put the towel down and left, and she made sure to slam her car door twice, and then I drove to the hardware store on Stapley and had every lock in my house rekeyed that same afternoon. My house, my name, my right. And then I sat at the kitchen table for a long time with a pen, and I did the thing I'd been circling for weeks and calling by softer names. I wrote out a 30-day notice for my mother. Formal words, the kind the law asks for. "You can stay with Deb," I said when I handed her the envelope. "I'll help you pack, I'll help you move, and I'll keep paying for your prescriptions. But you can't live here anymore." She read it twice. Her hand started to tremble, and for a second she looked genuinely old, and I made myself watch that and not take the envelope back. "You're evicting your own mother," she said. "I'm ending an arrangement, Mom," I said. "You ended it first. You just did it in my son's room." That night, past 10, she knocked on my bedroom door, holding 2 cups of tea. "Let me tell you about my ring," she said. I'd seen my mother angry, wounded, righteous, disappointed, usually at me. I had never once seen her do what she did sitting on the edge of my bed that night, which was speak quietly, with her eyes down, like a witness instead of a judge. In 1987, she said, she'd been married 8 months. Times were thin. Her brother Ray got arrested over a truck he shouldn't have been driving, and bail was more money than anyone had. So her mother, my grandmother, went into Martha's dresser while Martha was at work, took her wedding ring, and sold it to a pawnbroker before supper. Didn't ask. Told her about it after, at the table, in front of everyone. And when my mother cried, one time, her mother looked at her and said, "You have a husband. Ray has nothing. Fair is fair." My mother looked at her tea and said, "And she was right, Rachel." I cried one night, and then I understood what family is. Family is, the strong one carries. I've been proud of that my whole life. And I sat there in my scrubs and finally saw the whole chain laid out in the lamplight, my grandmother's hand in the dresser, my mother's tears rationed to a single night, Catherine's hand in the junk drawer, all of it one long relay, and every runner absolutely certain she was passing on love. "I'm not asking you to forgive your sister," my mother said. "I'm asking you to be strong." Like I was. And that's when I understood there was no argument I could win here, because she wasn't defending what they did to me. She was defending what was done to her. "Strong like you?" I asked her. "Or free like neither of us?" She looked at me for a long moment. Then she took both teacups and went to bed, and by morning she was telling Deb I'd chosen a watch over my family. The county attorney's office moved, and the family found out the state was real, and suddenly, everyone's tone changed. Catherine's lawyer reached out about what he called a resolution everyone could live with. Here was the shape of it. First-time offender, expecting a baby. The prosecutor was open to a deferred path, counseling, restitution, the record wiped clean if she completed it. But given the family circumstances, the office wanted to know where the victim stood, and a letter from me supporting leniency would carry real weight. And folded around that legal offer came the family's own package, hand-delivered by Deb's voice on my voicemail. Catherine would apologize, in front of everybody, at dinner. "Your mother is willing to put all this behind us, Everything can go back to how it was, honey. All of it, for one signature. I want to be honest with you about that week, because this is the part nobody believes about these stories. I wanted to sign it. Not for Catherine, for the how it was. Sunday dinners where nobody's in a courtroom. My mother's pancakes on Tommy's birthday. A family, whole, around a table, with me back in my old seat. And all I had to do was pick up the pen and be the strong one more time. That's the trap they build for women like me. The exit is always shaped exactly like the thing you've missed the most. Put yourself in that kitchen. The letter is one signature long. Your family comes back tomorrow. Or your son watches you fold. Again. Forever. Which one would you sign? Tell me honestly in the comments, because I rewrote my answer 100 times that week. And subscribe, because the dinner where they asked me to my face is what happened next. I finally said yes to Deb's Sunday dinner, and I went alone, because whatever was about to happen, Tommy wasn't going to watch it. 11 adults, one pot roast, one agenda. There was an empty chair waiting for me next to Catherine, which told me the seating had been discussed. Deb stood up before the salad and said, "Family meeting voice. We are not leaving this table until this family is whole again." Then they took turns, and I want you to hear how organized love sounds when it's aimed at you. "She's pregnant, Rachel. It's just stuff, Rachel. Stuff can be replaced. Your father would be ashamed, from an uncle who hadn't called me since the funeral. Think of the baby. Think of your mother's health. Think of Christmas." I ate slowly. I said almost nothing. I had learned something across that long summer. Silence works both directions, and mine had stopped being the agreeable kind. Catherine cried at the exact right moment, on cue, hand on her belly, and said she just wanted her sister back. And then my mother stood up, and the table went quiet, because everyone could feel the closing argument coming. She didn't yell. She put her palms flat on the tablecloth and made the offer that had been her whole life's logic. "I'll take the blame," she said. "Officially. I'll tell the county it was my idea, my permission, all of it. Put it on me. Just save your sister." My mother, offering to lie herself into a courtroom and calling it love, because that's the only kind she was ever taught. Every face turned to me. I folded my napkin, thanked Deb for dinner, and said I'd give my answer Thursday at the county attorney's office, and I left 11 people sitting in a silence I did not fill. Wednesday night, the night before Thursday, Tommy padded into the kitchen at 9, way past bedtime, with his negotiating face on. He'd heard more than I thought. Kids always have, and he put his cards on the table. "If Grandma says sorry, does everything go back?" I told him some of it could, and some of it couldn't, and he nodded like a little actuary, and then he asked the real question, the one he'd been carrying up and down the hallway for days. "Will Grandma still make me pancakes?" And there it was. 7 years old, and he was already learning the family arithmetic, already measuring how much loss he should quietly eat to keep the warm things coming. He was bargaining exactly the way I'd bargained my whole life, offering up his own hurt first, hoping the people who caused it would keep loving him at the same price. I saw a 12-year-old girl standing at a stove making sure her sister had lunch money, and I understood, finally and completely, that this was the inheritance. This was the thing being handed down in my family, wrapped as love. And I was the one holding it now, deciding whether to pass it to him. I told him the truth. "I don't know about pancakes, baby, but nobody gets to take your things and call it fair. Not ever again. And you will never have to earn what's already yours." He thought about it and went to bed. I sat down and wrote. And it wasn't the leniency letter. It was my victim impact statement. 4 short paragraphs. Every sentence a fact, not one adjective doing crime. Thursday came. I wore my nurse's calm. It has always fit me better than forgiveness. The conference room at the county attorney's office had a wall clock with a loud second hand, and I got to know it well, because I was 5 minutes early and the rest of them arrived together, which told me they'd met in the parking lot first. The deputy county attorney sat at the head, a tidy man with kind, quick eyes. Catherine's lawyer set out his folders. Catherine sat across from me, pale. No smile anywhere on her now, and through the interior window I could see my mother in the hallway chairs, hands around her purse strap like a rosary, with Deb beside her. On the table were 2 stacks of paper, and the geometry of them was the whole meeting. On his side, the resolution, deferred prosecution, counseling, restitution, contingent, as her lawyer kept almost singing, on the victim's support, and the letter itself, printed, flagged with a yellow tab where my signature would go. On my side, nothing yet, just my hands, and the envelope I'd carried in. Her lawyer talked for a while, and he was good, honestly. He said the words fresh start and healing and no winners here today. He said family twice a sentence. One signature, he said, sliding the letter across the table to me, and this family heals. The deputy county attorney looked at me and asked, gently, if I understood what was being proposed, and said the office took victims' wishes seriously in cases like this, and that there was no wrong answer. The second hand went around the clock once while I looked at the yellow tab. Nobody in that room knew what was in my envelope. My whole family was on the other side of a piece of glass, and for the first time in my life, so was I. I moved the leniency letter aside, squared, unsigned, and set my envelope down in its place. No, I said. That's my answer. And I'd like it noted that it comes with no anger attached. Then I opened the envelope and laid out what I'd brought. My victim impact statement, and the refrigerator tally, found and gone, in my own handwriting. I'm not here for a pound of flesh, I told the deputy county attorney. I'm here for the record. I don't need my sister in a cell, and I'm not asking you to make an example of a pregnant first offender. I'm asking for exactly 3 things. The truth, stated in a courtroom, in her own voice. Restitution, all $2,600 of it, at whatever monthly rate she can honestly manage. And a condition that she has no contact with my son unless I am present. What I will not do is sign a letter that calls this a misunderstanding. It was a decision, made with a key, over 6 days. Her lawyer started to talk and thought better of it. Catherine stared at me, and I watched her run out of scripts in real time, the sister card, the baby card, the family card. All of them face up on the table already, all of them spent. They brought my mother in then, her last play, and she stood behind Catherine's chair and looked at me the way you look at weather. Rachel, she said, fair is fair, and after 34 years that sentence finally came to the right address. You're right, Mom, I said. Fair is fair. That's why I'm not signing. The room was very quiet. The deputy slid me a different form, the one acknowledging the victim declined to support diversion, and I signed my name for the second time that summer in ink that doesn't come out. Catherine said, low and shaking, "You're not my sister anymore." My mother said nothing at all, which from her was a scream. I gathered my envelope, thanked the deputy for his time, and walked out of that building lighter and poorer than I had ever been in my life, both at once. And I want you to know the elevator down felt like a boat leaving a harbor. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, in a small courtroom with more echo than audience, my sister stood next to her lawyer and said the word guilty in a voice I'd never heard her use, a voice with no performance left in it. The plea her lawyer negotiated was, by any honest measure, merciful. Theft, entered as a Class 6 felony, the kind Arizona lets a judge later reduce to a misdemeanor if she completes everything. 3 years of probation, counseling, and restitution. $2,600, payable at $75 a month, plus the no-contact condition I'd asked for. Tommy, only with me present. No jail. I never wanted jail. The judge asked whether the victim wished to be heard, and I stood up in my clean clothes and my nurse's calm and read my statement. 4 short paragraphs. What was taken. What it had been worth on paper, and what it had been worth at 2 in the morning to a boy who talks to his father's jacket. What a locked cabinet and a borrowed key mean about intent. And one sentence at the end I'd rewritten more times than the rest combined. I'm not here for a pound of flesh. I'm here for the record. Because my son will someday ask what his mother did, and the record is my answer. Nobody gasped. Real courtrooms don't gasp. The judge thanked me, accepted the plea, set the terms, and moved to the next case. And that ordinariness was its own kind of justice. My family's private law, the one where need beats ownership and the strong one eats the loss, overruled in 4 unglamorous minutes by the actual kind. Catherine kept her eyes on the table, both hands around her belly, and the smile from the empty room was nowhere in that building. I didn't stay to watch her cry. The record didn't need my eyes on it. My mother moved out right on the 30-day line, and I kept every promise I'd made in that envelope on the kitchen table. I packed boxes beside her for 2 days, carefully, her wedding china in double newspaper, and I carried them to Deb's spare room myself, and I set up her pill organizer on Deb's windowsill the way she likes it. Sunday on the left. That's the part people don't understand about boundaries. I didn't stop taking care of my mother. I stopped paying for the privilege of being robbed by her. At the door, with the last box in my arms, she tried one final time, quietly, no audience left to play to. "Someday, you'll need family, Rachel," she said, "and there will be no one." I stood there holding her china and heard the sentence underneath the sentence, the one she'd been told at a kitchen table in 1987 and had spent her whole life obeying. "Then I'll be no one's inventory either, Mom," I said, and I put her box in Deb's hallway, and I hugged her, because she is my mother, and she is also the first casualty of the thing she did to me, and both of those are true, at once. Then I drove home to my own house, where every lock answered to one key, mine. The quiet that night was enormous. Tommy asked if we were sad. I said yes, and that sad was allowed, and we made pancakes anyway. Ours were better. The call came on a Saturday in September, and it started with, "Ma'am, this is Walt. Don't get your hopes all the way up." Walt Peterson, it turned out, had never stopped working my case. All those weeks, the retired machinist had been going to the swap meets and the tool aisles where men like him drink bad coffee, describing a copper-colored pickup with an old tow mirror, and somewhere between a socket-set table and a parking lot in Apache Junction, somebody said, "That sounds like Earl's truck." Earl had bought a $15 unfinished boat off a porch in June because his wife thought it would look sweet on the patio with a fern in it. It had sat outside all summer. Monsoon rain. 110-degree sun. When I drove out and Earl carried it to my car, apologizing the whole way, I made myself look at it like a nurse and not a widow. The hull had checked and split along one side. 2 ribs had sprung loose. The keel Daniel had shaped with a hand plane was warped like a question mark. Earl wouldn't take a dime. He looked sick about the whole thing, and I thanked him and drove my husband's boat home in the passenger seat, belted in, because some things you do without deciding them. Tommy came out front, and he inspected her, hands behind his back, exactly the way his father used to walk around a helicopter. "We weren't done building it," he said at last, and this time I had an answer that wasn't grief. I went inside and came back with a folded piece of graph paper from a toolbox that a stranger's decency had carried home to us. "Then we're not done, baby," I said. "Dad left us the plans. Here's where everything stood 3 months after that courtroom, because I know you want the accounting. And I'm a woman who keeps tallies." Tommy's room came back to life one paycheck at a time. Walls a deep harbor blue, he picked out himself. A new bed with a little astronaut on the headboard. And here is my favorite line item in the whole story. The first $75 restitution check cleared the same week I bought that bed, which means my sister is furnishing, 1 month at a time, the room she emptied. The court calls it restitution. Tommy calls it his astronaut bed. I call it arithmetic, finally running in the right direction. The flight jacket hangs in his closet again, 3 washes in, down to mostly sunshine and a ghost of someone else's smoke. The Hamilton sits on his dresser, running fine, scratch and all. I never had the crystal polished. Some records should stay legible. And on the first Saturday in October, on Tommy's 8th birthday, at the lake park off Power Road, a small wooden sailboat touched water for the first time. New ribs, new planking, and 3 boards from the original hull that were still true, because we rebuilt her from Daniel's penciled plans, his cuts and our cuts holding each other up. And she sat the water like she'd been waiting for it, And my son laughed with his whole body, and I let myself hear the promised land, 3 years late and right on time. Catherine had her baby in late October, a girl. I mailed a box of diapers to Deb's address. No note, because my quarrel was never with a baby, and a boundary doesn't have to be a wall with glass on top. She still tells anyone who'll listen that I destroyed the family over furniture. My mother still lives at Deb's, still believes what 1987 taught her, still tells the story with herself as the reasonable one. I hear the family repeats it at dinners I'm not at. Fair is fair, passed around that table like gravy. The chain didn't break everywhere. It just doesn't run through my house anymore. Sundays now, it's 2 plates. 3, when Lauren wanders over with something she pretends is leftover. And nobody at my table has ever once told my son what he does or doesn't need. He sleeps through the night again. Took a while. Took the room coming back. Board by board. Check by check. My mother taught me fair is fair, and she was right. She just never expected me to do the math. And the boat? Turns out we weren't done building. We were just done building with them. Here is the one thing I know now that I didn't know in June. A family that only calls you strong while you're carrying them will call you cruel the day you set the weight down. And setting it down in front of your child may be the most loving thing your hands ever do. That's my story. 1 empty room, 14 screenshots, 2 signatures I can never take back, and a little wooden boat that finally touched water. If someone in your family calls it fair when they take from your child, protect the record. And the child, first. Share this with someone who needs the reminder. Drop a comment with your story. Hit subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one.